My name is Martín Espada, and this poem is called Alabanza in praise of Local 100. It's a 9/11 poem, but it's a 9/11 poem with a twist. The focus is on the food service workers who were killed that day, most of them immigrant, and many of them undocumented, invisible in life, and even more invisible in death, which is why I wrote the poem. The word alabanza means praise in Spanish, and the full title refers to the labor union to which these workers belong. So, alabanza in praise of Local 100 for the 43 members of hotel employees and restaurant employees, Local 100, working at the windows on the World Restaurant who lost their lives in the attack on the World Trade Center. Alabanza. Praised the cook with a shaven head and a tattoo on his shoulder that said Oye, a blue-eyed Puerto Rican with people from Fajardo, the harbor of pirates centuries ago. Praised the lighthouse in Fajardo, candle glimmering white to worship the dark saint of the sea, Alabanza. Praised the cook's yellow pirate's cap worn in the name of Roberto Clemente, his plane that flamed into the ocean loaded with cans for Nicaragua, for all the mouths chewing the ash of earthquakes, Alabanza. Praise the kitchen radio, dial clicked even before the dial on the oven, so that music and Spanish rose before bread. Praise the bread, Alabanza. Praise Manhattan from 107 flights up, like Atlantis glimpsed through the windows of an ancient aquarium. Praise the great windows where immigrants from the kitchen could squint and almost see their world. Hear the chant of nations: Ecuador, Mexico, República Dominicana, Haiti, Yemen, Ghana, Bangladesh, Alabanza. Praise the kitchen in the morning where the gas burned blue on every stove and exhaust fans fired their diminutive propellers, hands cracked eggs with quick thumbs, sliced open cartons to build an altar of cans, Alabanza. Praise the busboy's music, the chime of his dishes and silverware in the tub, Alabanza. Praise the dish dog, the dishwasher who worked that morning because another dishwasher could not stop coughing, or because he needed overtime to pile the sacks of rice and beans for a family floating away on some Caribbean island plagued by frogs, Alabanza. Praise the waitress who heard the radio in the kitchen and sang to herself about a man gone, Alabanza. After the thunder, wilder than thunder, after the shudder deep in the glass of the great windows, after the radio stopped singing like a tree full of terrified frogs, after night burst the dam of day and flooded the kitchen. For a time, the stoves glowed in darkness like the lighthouse in Fajardo, like a cook's soul. Soul, I say, even if the dead cannot tell us about the bristles of God's beard, because God has no face. Soul, I say, to name the smoke, beings flung in constellations across the night sky of this city and cities to come. Alabanza, I say, even if God has no face. Alabanza. When the war began, from Manhattan and Kabul, two constellations of smoke rose and drifted to each other, mingling in icy air, and one said with an Afghan tongue, "Teach me to dance. We have no music here." And the other said with a Spanish tongue, "I will teach you. Music is all we have." I couldn't find the words. Most people could not find the words to express the enormity of 9/11. And so the poem actually came about 9 months later. I believe it was May of the following year. Um, and I wrote it on a train on the way to Vermont, of all places. And the seed of the poem was planted I would say, by an old friend. His name was Abe Osheroff. And Abe had been a witness to history for most of the 20th century. He had been born in 1915. He was a veteran of the Spanish Civil War. And it was Abe who said to me, both native New Yorkers, he said, why don't you try to envision what this was like from the perspective of someone trapped in the dark, trapped inside one of those buildings? And I had not thought of it in that way at all. And so I began to contemplate that point of view. And then I saw a story, was first reported, I believe, in the BBC News concerning Windows on the World and Here Local 100 and these 43 workers who had been killed, who were members of that union. And I went to the website of Windows of the World. It was still up. And there was this rotating camera that gave you a point of view of the restaurant from one end to the other, with the great view of the city beyond. And so it all began to fall together. It's important to remember that there were no survivors. And since there were no survivors, this had to be an act of the imagination. I had some long conversations with a good friend of mine who was a chef and worked in many restaurants, including restaurants like this one. And he became loosely the inspiration for the first character I describe in the poem. But it is, and it must be a work of the imagination because there were no survivors. Having said that, I did a lot of research and I did a lot of reading. And I was able to glean not only from the BBC News, but also from other sources like the New York Times, the nationalities, for example, of those who had been killed. That was a list that I picked up from, I believe it was an article in the Times. And there are many other factual foundations for what happens in the poem and the sequence of events. I should emphasize here that I do have a personal connection to what I'm writing about. I was born and raised in that city. I'm from the East New York section of Brooklyn. I grew up there in the Linden Projects, and that was my city. And also, I should add that I had jobs like that. I worked in a kitchen. I washed dishes. I had every job you could possibly imagine. And so that very personal identification enables me to do what it is I'm describing in the poem, to ground it in particulars, to ground it in that sense of immediacy and humanity. These are people going through their daily routine of work early in the morning, and the focus of the poem is early on is really that. It wouldn't surprise me to hear that somebody would read this poem and hear something of Melville. I could think of a number of other writers that I could mention. There are also writers that virtually no one has ever heard of who influenced me then as they influence me now. One of them is also in the anthology. His name is Jack Agueros, Agueros. Jack was like a second father to me. And Jack wrote sonnets and psalms about people in his community, Puerto Rican, New York. He wrote about people who worked in such places. The sacred imagery and the sacred diction in the poem uh, was certainly deliberate. Um, I, first of all, must confess that I am not religious. In fact, I will come out here as an atheist. Um, but I do believe that certain things are sacred. And I do believe that if we are trying to change the perspective on human beings or their labor, we have to use sometimes the language of the sacred to get there. I'm trying to complicate history and even the way we see 9/11 by making the abstract concrete, by making the general specific, by trying to give history a human face, eyes, nose, mouth, uh, by giving history a human voice. And it's that particularity that drives the poem. Part of what I'm doing here, in a sense, with Alabanza, uh, is to write a poem that began with a journalistic impulse and now has a historic impulse, right? So, it began as journalism, is now history, and yet we can still find ways of seeing the terrible events in the poem as relevant today. I wish they weren't. I really wish I could put myself out of business and make this poem obsolete. But the poem, sadly, is not obsolete. Not until this world changes and we start treating each other a whole lot better.